The most terrible thing, in my opinion, is realizing that you share a home, meals, and even a bed with someone who feels like an enemy. For me, that person turned out to be my wife. After years of walking a long and difficult path together, she betrayed me in a way I never imagined. And, as a result, she faced the consequences. A year ago, on a quiet Monday morning, I sat reflecting. I wasn't in the best mood. My wife, Sheila, and I had retired the previous year at 60, she from teaching, and I from the British Transport Police. At first, we embraced the freedom retirement brought, finding ourselves more connected and intimate. Sometimes, it even felt like we had rediscovered each other. But as time passed, things began to change. By that Monday, I could barely remember the last time we had been intimate. Sheila insisted my low spirits came from boredom and a lack of hobbies, which she claimed led to depression and fatigue, making intimacy the last thing on my mind. I had another theory: my depression was rooted in the absence of intimacy. But another unsettling thought lingered: was Sheila unhappy as well? And if so, was she finding comfort elsewhere? Take that Monday, for instance. Sheila had plans to meet her friend Sally for their weekly coffee date. I followed her discreetly, but she did exactly as she said, met Sally, went to their favorite cafe, and returned home with shopping bags and receipts to prove it. For weeks, I did the same. I checked everything: receipts, times, locations. All of it added up. On Thursdays, she attended her pottery class while I went to the pub. I even peeked through the window to ensure she was there. She was. Despite all this, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sheila was hiding something from me. It wasn't until the following Wednesday that the pieces began to fall into place that it was laundry day. As I got out of bed, Sheila walked out of the ensuite with an armful of blue towels. "I'm putting these in the wash now," she said. "Can you grab the purple towels from the cupboard and place them in both bathrooms?" I did as she asked, and after breakfast, she asked me to check on the washing machine. Peering inside, I saw blue and white towels spinning. Nothing unusual. Later, as we stripped the bed for the next load, an odd thought began to nag at me. It finally hit me when I saw the towels fluttering on the line in the backyard. Among the neatly hung blue towels was a single white bath sheet. It wasn't from our bathroom, and we hadn't used it. The white towels were only ever brought out in the summer for the grandchildren's inflatable pool. Yet here it was, freshly laundered in March. My mind raced. Was Sheila using the white towels to hide evidence of something happening in our home? It couldn't have been in our bed, I would have noticed. Then, the realization hit me like a hammer: Sheila had been drugging me. That's why I had been so lethargic lately. "You're looking pensive, dear," Sheila said, interrupting my thoughts. "What?" "Oh, yes," I said, snapping out of my thoughts. "I've been mentally working on this puzzle for a while now. It's been quite frustrating, but I think it's finally starting to make sense." "That's good, dear. It's important to keep your mind active," Sheila remarked absent-mindedly, clearly uninterested as she returned to her book and finished her coffee. "Oh, my mind is definitely active," I thought, but I kept that to myself. Here's my reconstruction of the crime: the suspect, my wife, the prohibited substances, her prescribed sedatives, the victim, me. Her plan: use the sedatives to keep me subdued, then invite her lover, an unknown individual, into the house. Where did they engage in their secret rendezvous? Somewhere discreet. It's so clear now. 3 months ago, Sheila introduced a new routine. Around 9:30 p.m., she'd bring me a small whiskey as a nightcap. Then, at 10, we'd take our tablets, her sedative for sleep, a statin for my cholesterol, and a multivitamin for both of us. She claimed that taking our medications right before bed made it easier to remember and more effective. I made a mental note to check my tablets carefully when I had the chance. If my suspicions were correct, I knew the how and roughly the where. But who? Who could she possibly be sneaking into our house at night? Could it be Justin, our smug and irritating neighbor? The thought made my blood boil. Let me backtrack a bit. My name is Mark Smith. I used to be Detective Inspector Smith until I retired 2 years ago at 60. I might have been Chief Inspector by now if not for an incident earlier in my career. Let's just say a particularly unpleasant suspect fell down the stairs, twice, while resisting arrest. Nothing was ever proven, but it certainly cast a shadow over my career. Still, the move to the British Transport Police allowed me to finish my service on a high note and secure a decent pension. I've tried to stay active in retirement, but lately, lethargy had taken over, likely thanks to those pills Sheila had been giving me that I'm 6 feet tall, reasonably fit, and not bad looking for my age. My wife Sheila, at 58, is elegant and slender, with long dark hair and striking green eyes. She's always turned heads, but lately, her charms seemed directed elsewhere. Our neighbors were an eclectic bunch. On one side, we had an elderly couple we rarely saw. On the other, there were Julie and her husband, Justin, the jerk, as I called him. Justin was a self-satisfied hedge fund manager with a polished, smug demeanor. Despite his charm, I found him sarcastic, condescending, and generally insufferable. Julie, however, was lovely, graceful and warm, with a smoky voice that could have made her a blues legend. She had been through a lot, raising her twins alone after her first husband passed away. I had no idea what she saw in Justin. It occurred to me that Sheila's glowing remarks about Justin might not be as innocent as they seemed. Could she know him better than I imagined? By Thursday evening, I had a plan. Sheila left for her pottery class at 6:30 p.m. as usual, returning around 9:30. Once she was gone, I grabbed a pair of nitrile gloves from the garage and began a systematic search of the house. What was I looking for? Anything unusual, something that should have been there but wasn't, or something that shouldn't have been there at all. In daily life, we rationalize things that are out of place, but during an investigation, it's often these oddities, no matter how mundane, that lead to breakthroughs. I started with the tablets. The ones Sheila had been giving me, claiming they were vitamins, were actually her prescribed sedatives, as I had suspected. The enclosed leaflet explicitly warned against taking them with alcohol. I had spat them out the previous night, and by morning, I felt like a new man. Over the next few hours, I carefully searched every room, ensuring I left no trace of my presence. Sheila didn't need to know I was investigating. In the end, I concluded there were no signs of cheating in any of the spare bedrooms. The sheets were clean and freshly ironed, though I knew they hadn't been washed recently. It was clear these rooms hadn't been used. Unfortunately, there were no signs of intimacy in our bedroom either, which only fueled my anger. Then I struck gold, or, rather, damning evidence. Between the seat cushions of the 3-seater sofa in the back of the house, I found a piece of foil from a condom wrapper. It wasn't mine. Now I knew where it had happened. The betrayal was undeniable. She had likely used one of the old towels to clean up, thrown it in the wash, and then returned to my bed as if nothing had happened. Why marriage had reached its end, non-negotiable. Legally, I could divorce Sheila without needing to prove infidelity, but that felt unsatisfactory. Someone else had been enjoying what I had been denied, and revenge seemed necessary. Normally, I don't consider myself petty, I can brush off minor offenses. But this was blatant disrespect, and it demanded a severe response. As I quietly plotted my next steps, I noticed Sheila's indifference toward me, and, upon reflection, toward our relationship. I no longer cared about her either. But I was the only one aware of our impending divorce. Every night, I pretended to swallow my pills, discreetly spitting them out when she wasn't looking. It was around midnight on Saturday, technically Sunday morning, when her phone buzzed, jolting me awake. I lay still as she stirred, got out of bed, and tiptoed across the room. I heard her open and close the linen closet door on the landing, followed by silence. I considered going downstairs to confirm her infidelity, but the thought of witnessing it unfold made my stomach turn. I thought about bursting in to confront them, but causing mere discomfort wasn't satisfying enough. Besides, any physical confrontation could backfire. As a retired police officer, I couldn't risk ending up behind bars. To truly get my revenge, I needed them to believe they were still in control. So, I waited. Then, I quietly activated the house alarm, strategically placed beneath my bedside table. Sheila must have disabled it to allow her accomplice entry. After giving them a few moments to settle in, I pressed the panic button. The chaos that ensued rattled me, but it certainly ruined Justin's plans for the evening. I watched him dart from the back of our house to the safety of his own. Sheila must have rushed to the main panel to override the alarm. I knew she had no idea how to operate it beyond arming and disarming it. She had ignored my explanation when we had the system installed. When she returned to our room, I couldn't resist a jab. "Just got in?" I asked, feigning the groggy tone of someone who had been drugged. "Where were you? Is it late?" "I had to go downstairs to deactivate the alarm," she grumbled. "What triggered it?" I asked innocently. "It only goes off if someone's downstairs." "I checked," she said quickly. "There's no one there. All the doors and windows are secure. Go back to sleep." So, I did, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. By Sunday evening, both Sheila and Justin seemed to have recovered from the previous night's psychological warfare. They scheduled their next meeting for Tuesday at 11:30 p.m., which suited me perfectly. I had a plan, but it required speaking with Julie first. On Monday, Sheila left to meet Sally as usual. Justin's car was missing from the neighbor's driveway, and I silently hoped Julie was working from home. When I knocked, she answered the door with her usual warm smile. But her expression shifted when she saw my serious demeanor. "Mark, is everything all right? You seem somber." "Julie, I'm really sorry, but we need to talk, and time is short." "What's going on?" she inquired, her brow furrowing with concern. "I'll give you the condensed version for now. But could we coincidentally bump into each other outside the library around 2:30 and discuss this further?" "Sure," she agreed, "but go ahead and give me the short version anyway." So, I did. I explained the fatigue, the new regimen of whiskey and pills, the substituted sedatives, and the intimacy issues. "Damn him," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. I suspected he was having an affair, but I couldn't figure out who it might be. "Would it surprise you if I told you he's been giving me a vitamin pill every night to strengthen my immune system? No wonder I feel like I'm in a daze half the time." "Are you very angry?" I asked, cautiously testing the waters. "Because I'm leaning toward revenge, but if I act on it, I'll end up in jail." "I feel exactly the same," she replied. "Of course, I could kick this little jerk out, but I want him to suffer too, very much. I have a plan," I informed her. "And if we execute it properly, we'll stay safe, and they'll get what they deserve." "I'm in," she said firmly. "I haven't even told you the plan yet," I said, surprised by her determination. "I don't care," she replied. "As long as it pours misery onto them, count me in." This was the first time I'd been alone with Julie, and I couldn't help but admire her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and carried a sense of vengeance that matched my own. What wasn't to admire? I shared the plan with her. It was straightforward, requiring no elaborate setups and only minimal lying. Most of the work would be done by the authorities. "Got it," she said, her resolve unwavering. "Give me until the end of the morning to think it over, and I'll coincidentally run into you after lunch. One more thing," I added as I headed out. "If the police ask about our last conversation, it was about a spare printer cable. I'll swing by town to pick one up after lunch." She flashed me a knowing grin. "Got it. Sorry I couldn't be of more help until later." With that, I departed. After lunch, we met, and I handed her the printer cable I'd purchased. The plan was simple and easily executable. Our main focus was to avoid any suspicious behavior toward our cheating spouses that might tip them off. We also agreed to take our sleeping pills on Monday and Tuesday nights, on our terms. On Tuesday, I decided to organize the garage, trying to distract myself. Sheila seemed to be preparing for another rendezvous at our house. She had cleaned the sunroom and prominently placed the white towel in the linen cupboard, ready for their activities. Maintaining my distance, I channeled my frustration into tidying up. That night, at 10 o'clock, Sheila handed me a generous pour of whiskey along with my medication. She watched as I appeared to swallow the pills, then returned to the kitchen for her own dose. Discreetly, I spat out the sedatives and took my statin with a sip of scotch instead. It was crucial that my toxicology remained consistent. By 10:30, I feigned drowsiness and complained about struggling to stay awake. Sheila snapped at me to go to bed, which I did, but I focused on staying alert. After nearly 40 years together and raising 2 children, this betrayal under our own roof, after drugging me, was heartless. Around 11:30, Sheila's phone vibrated on the bedside table. I let out a soft murmur, as if I'd been disturbed, then slowed my breathing to feign sleep. I heard her get up, grab a towel from the closet, and head downstairs. Her phone buzzed again moments later. Most likely, it was Julie texting to confirm Justin's arrival. I tiptoed downstairs, careful not to make a sound. I stopped at the slightly ajar kitchen door, where muffled voices and the sound of movement reached my ears. A surge of disgust and indignation coursed through me. If Sheila no longer loved me, she could have left. But why this betrayal, and with that arrogant jerk? The solarium was dimly lit, complemented by the soft glow of the oven's LED display, which illuminated the rolling pin I had left on the countertop. If questioned later, I could explain that I was in the kitchen, surrounded by many potential tools, and the rolling pin just happened to be at hand. I endured the unbearable sound of my wife betraying me with this despicable man until she inadvertently gave me the perfect signal. Her scream of, "Please, don't stop," was all I needed. Bursting into the room, I shouted, "Get off my wife." The words rang true, though my promise of, "Don't worry, darling, I'll save you," was hollow. The fool froze mid-action, resembling a startled meerkat. Without hesitation, I delivered a forceful blow to the side of his head with the rolling pin. Despite my partially drugged state, the impact was heavier than intended. He collapsed instantly, still entangled with my unfaithful wife. Through the window, I saw Julie's expression as she witnessed the chaotic scene unfold. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I muttered indistinctly, causing Sheila to scream in alarm. "Don't worry," I added loudly for effect. "He can't hurt you anymore." Then I carefully collapsed onto them, pinning her against her lover, and pretended to lose consciousness. The effect of the sedative blurred the line between pretense and reality as I drifted off. Meanwhile, Julie had her own version of events. Around 10 o'clock, as usual, Justin had brought her a generous glass of sherry and a vitamin tablet to boost her immune system. Shortly after consuming both, she felt nauseous and vomited in the bathroom sink. Not wanting to disturb her husband, who was engrossed in the television, she announced she was going to bed early. Later, she heard a door slam. When Justin's absence stretched on and her calls went unanswered, she peered out of the bedroom window and spotted him in our yard near the patio doors leading to the solarium. Suspicious, she texted Sheila's number to check on us but received no response. Frustrated, she decided to investigate. Julie was stunned to see, through the solarium windows, her husband engaged in an affair with my wife on the couch. Her rage over his betrayal overcame her shock, and she began recording the scene. Moments later, I stumbled upon the situation, possibly appearing intoxicated. Misinterpreting the situation, I struck Justin on the head, seemingly to protect Sheila, before collapsing. At that moment, Julie stopped recording and called emergency services. She calmly informed the dispatcher that both police and ambulances were needed. I had advised her earlier to be as truthful as possible and let the authorities handle the investigation. If they did their jobs properly, justice would prevail. Nearly everything she reported was accurate, except for one detail: her nausea and vomiting had been self-induced, that I was roused by a paramedic trying to gain my attention. Groggy and exhausted, I muttered, "My wife, is she all right? Did he hurt her?" "She's fine," the paramedic assured me. "She's speaking with the authorities now." With that reassurance, I slipped back into unconsciousness. When I woke again, I was in a hospital bed, with a doctor and a police officer nearby. The doctor spoke first. "The paramedics were concerned about your responses to stimuli. It seemed like you might have been under the influence of a prohibited substance or alcohol. With your consent, we'd like to take a blood sample." I nodded weakly. "Go ahead, document. I've got nothing to hide." He drew the sample, and I drifted back to sleep. Around 9 o'clock the next morning, I woke to find another officer stationed near the door, a young man who looked barely out of his teens. "Are you feeling all right, sir?" he asked politely. "I think so," I replied, still groggy. "I'm not even sure why I'm here." "I'll let the boss explain that," he said with a wry smile. "It's above my pay grade." Shortly after, a nurse came in, offering tea and toast. I was grateful for the NHS and accepted her kindness as she checked my vitals. Meanwhile, the officer stepped out to speak softly into his radio. He returned moments later, still murmuring into the device. "Yes, sir. I'll inform him now," he said before addressing me. "The boss is on his way here. He'll be here in about half an hour. Are you okay to wait, sir?" I responded with a sardonic grin. "No worries. We both know if I try to leave, you'll cuff me. That'll agitate you, and I'll have to eat breakfast with my hands tied. Let's keep this civil, shall we?" He chuckled at my retort. "Dealing with a professional is refreshing, sir. It streamlines things." Then, struck by a notion, he leaned out the door and addressed a passing nurse. Upon returning, he settled into his chair, flipping through a Country Life magazine left on the nearby table. Catching my gaze, he explained, "I just mentioned you might be leaving soon, escorted, so we'd both appreciate a cup of tea sooner rather than later." True to his word, within 10 minutes, I was nibbling on toast, both of us sipping tea and lamenting England's dismal performance in the second test in Australia. An hour later, I found myself in an interrogation room at the local police station, arrested on suspicion of assault causing bodily harm. The investigating officer introduced himself and reiterated the formal caution. "Do you understand?" I nodded. This offense carried serious consequences if charged and convicted. "Yes, I understand." He prompted me for my account of the previous evening's events. I provided him with a more or less accurate version. My wife had brought me a beverage and my medication. Feeling exhausted, I retired to bed. Something stirred me awake, and upon realizing my wife wasn't beside me or in the bathroom, I went downstairs. I detected a commotion, something that sounded like a struggle. Acting on instinct, I grabbed the nearest object and rushed into the sun lounge. To my horror, I discovered a man assaulting my wife while she pleaded for help. I recall striking him, but my memory fades after that until the doctor revived me. "Is my wife okay?" I inquired. "She's unharmed, as far as we can tell," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "She's been apprehended as well. You collapsed on top of her, inadvertently pinning her. Allegedly, when the paramedics freed her, she attempted to assault you with the same rolling pin you had used." I was genuinely affronted by this revelation. My hurt expression was genuine. But why? He was attacking her. The officer regarded me thoughtfully. "Do you not recognize the gentleman?" he queried. That I confessed that I didn't. It was dark, and his back was turned to me. My head was spinning too. "It seems," he said softly, "that you walked in on your wife with her lover, your neighbor, Mr. Justin Clark." I simply stared at him. Any attempt at feigned surprise would have been transparent, so I just grappled with the truth. "Can we assume you were unaware?" he inquired. That I nodded. I had my suspicions, given her recent detachment, but she never had the chance. Even when we were apart, I always knew where she was. I attributed her distance to my depression rather than infidelity. "Let me clarify," I pressed on. "I'm being arrested for suspected ABH, but the man I assaulted, thinking he was attacking my wife, was actually her lover, my married neighbor." "That's a succinct summary," he confirmed. "Damn. I guess I should inquire about his well-being, then," I muttered. The officer grimaced. "He's in a medically induced coma. The impact caused a minor but significant brain hemorrhage. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it's a serious matter." I remained silent, processing the information. "I need to inquire about your medical history," the officer said, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "We'll verify with your GP, but what medications are you currently taking?" I mentioned the statins for my cholesterol and the vitamins my wife had insisted I take. The officer rose from his seat. "You're still under arrest, but I'm withholding charges for now pending further investigation. I trust you understand." We exchanged knowing smiles before he signaled for a uniformed officer to escort me to a cell. I didn't resist or object. The police had their tasks, evidence to gather and process. I felt secure in my position and saw no need to stir up trouble. The investigation proceeded smoothly. Given the severity of Justin's injuries, the authorities were meticulous in their efforts. Within a week, it became clear that both Julie and I had been deliberately and methodically drugged with a prescription medication purportedly for my wife's non-existent insomnia over the span of at least 3 months. Forensic analysis of the sink trap in Julie's bathroom uncovered traces of vomit containing the same substance found in both our homes. The medication had been stored in containers falsely labeled as vitamin supplements. The only fingerprints on these containers belonged to Justin and Sheila. Julie and I had been administered the same doses, which, due to her smaller stature, had begun to cause liver damage. Fortunately, the condition was caught before it became irreversible. The video Julie had taken, along with recordings of our phone conversations, corroborated our stories. Moreover, my blood test revealed that I had been heavily sedated during the altercation with Justin. This revelation shifted the focus of the police investigation. A detailed analysis of Justin and Sheila's phone conversations and text messages confirmed their collusion and their deliberate use of illegal substances on Julie and me. In one particularly galling message, Justin boasted about enjoying time with my wife in our home while I slept upstairs. He viewed my lack of respect for him as retaliation, fueling his twisted sense of offense. Reflecting on some of my wife's past comments, I found myself grappling with a dark thought: if I'd had the chance, perhaps she deserved the rolling pin, too. Things began to take a positive turn. Julie and I both cooperated fully with the police, granting them unrestricted access to our homes. A forensic search of our computers, meant to determine if we had premeditated the incident, revealed something far more sinister. Investigators discovered that Justin had been embezzling funds from his investors and orchestrating a scheme for a major payoff before fleeing to a country with no extradition treaty. Hidden in a spare room was a laptop containing evidence of several suspicious accounts, including one in Sheila's name. Sheila had believed they would take our money and escape together. Justin, however, had other plans. He intended to run with both her money and mine, leaving her behind. I wished I could have witnessed the moment when the police broke the news to her. Ultimately, both Justin and Sheila were charged with maliciously administering poison with intent to injure, aggrieve, or annoy another person under Section 24 of the Offenses Against the Person Act of 1861. The maximum sentence for this offense was 5 years. Additionally, they were charged with conspiracy to defraud. Despite Sheila not being directly involved in the financial schemes, Her text messages to Justin demonstrated her active participation and awareness, exposing her complicity. The maximum sentence for conspiracy to defraud was 10 years. Justin was discharged from the hospital and immediately taken into police custody. Both he and Sheila remained incarcerated until their trial. Sheila was sentenced to 2 years in prison for malicious administration and another 2 years for conspiracy to defraud, to be served concurrently. Justin received a 3-year sentence for malicious administration due to the harm caused to Julie's liver and an additional 5 years for fraud. Julie spared no effort in helping the police trace every last penny of Justin's assets. Despite his grim circumstances, there was a faint glimmer of hope for him. The prison medical staff were optimistic that his speech would recover fully by the time he was released. However, his employment prospects seemed bleak. Most of his assets were confiscated under the Proceeds of Crime Act, and his former colleagues made it clear they wouldn't trust him with anything involving finances. As for Sheila, her betrayal was met with widespread condemnation. The police clarified that Julie and I were victims, and I was not charged with actual bodily harm due to the heavy sedation I'd endured at the hands of Justin and Sheila. Feeling vindicated, I enlisted some old acquaintances in the media. Julie and I chose to remain dignified and silent, needing time to process the egregious betrayals we had suffered. The media coverage was scathing. Sheila and Justin were universally condemned, with no pundit or commentator offering justification for their actions. Julie garnered significant public sympathy, while I, though not vilified, received less attention. During the trial, our children attended the courtroom. I wasn't allowed to join them until I had testified and been excused. My time on the witness stand was brief, only about 20 minutes. The most incriminating evidence came from the forensic experts: my blood tests, Julie's liver damage, the vitamin containers, the text messages, and the financial analysis. I couldn't understand why Julie let Justin convince her to plead not guilty when their texts practically confessed everything. As I've mentioned before, Justin always thought he was clever, but he wasn't. After hearing the stark truth in court, my daughter severed ties with her mother indefinitely. She informed Sheila in prison that she was not allowed to contact or visit her or the children. If Sheila attempted to, they would seek a restraining order, citing her status as a convicted poisoner. My son, who had been very close to Sheila, took it especially hard. One evening, he hesitantly asked me, "Would it upset you if I visited Mom in prison to hear her side?" "If you feel that's necessary, son," I reassured him, "then you should go. Otherwise, you might regret it later. But prepare yourself for disappointment." The visit took place a couple of weeks later. That evening, he called me. "You were right, Dad," he admitted. I was disappointed. But now I don't have to regret cutting ties with her. Apparently, Sheila had blamed everyone but herself. She told him it was my fault, that I hadn't appreciated her, had neglected myself, and hadn't achieved a higher position in society. She insisted she bore no responsibility, claiming that Justin manipulated her during a vulnerable time, grooming her and offering to give Julie and me illegal substances before transferring our savings to his offshore accounts. Then, she took her delusion to an extreme. "I'll have to explain a lot to get your father back," she told my son. "Mom," he replied sharply, "you poisoned him to be with the man he hated. Bring him back. Next time, I'm afraid you won't get off so easily." His outrage grew. "Do you realize Dad saw all the messages where you humiliated him and sent them to the idiot next door? Right now, Dad's biggest regret is that he didn't know you were with Justin, otherwise, he might have knocked you out with the rolling pin. He risked going to jail thinking he was protecting you from a robber, while you were bullying him behind his back with your sneaky lover." I felt a pang of guilt for my son's pain, but I knew Sheila had brought this on herself. Their separation was far from amicable. In fact, my son set the same conditions as his sister: no calls, no letters, no visits. Sheila forfeited not only her dignity and reputation but also her husband, her children, and her grandchildren, all for a tawdry affair with an embezzler. She also lost a substantial portion of her savings. During our divorce proceedings, while she was still in custody, I sold our house and fairly divided our assets. With enough wealth to disqualify her from legal aid, Sheila had to pay for her defense out of her own pocket. Additionally, I pursued a personal injury claim against her for the emotional distress her malicious actions caused. By the time she is released, she'll have little more than her pension to live on. Simultaneously, Julie divorced Justin. If he expected half of their home, he was sorely mistaken. The house had been placed in trust by Julie and her first husband for their twins, allowing Julie lifetime occupancy. Justin was left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Julie and I weathered the storm of public scrutiny for a few months, careful to portray ourselves as victims of our spouse's despicable behavior. When the media frenzy became overwhelming, I retreated to a secluded villa in the south of France for 2 weeks, while Julie sought solace with a friend in a similar retreat. During that time, we realized how much we trusted each other, something neither of us had experienced in our previous relationships. At first, we were friends. Then, we became lovers. Eventually, I sold my share of the house and moved in with Julie. My children adore her, and her children have welcomed me as a new part of their family. Though we are not married, and likely never will be, I am proud to call her my life partner. I trust her completely, and I believe she would never deceive me. Just as she trusts me, I know she would be honest if our relationship ever needed to end. I started this story by mentioning my depression caused by a lack of intimacy. Julie has certainly found a solution for that. During our first week in France, we rekindled a passion I hadn't experienced in years. She is an incredibly passionate woman, and I cannot fathom how anyone could leave her for someone like Sheila. Now, we still take vitamins at night, but the right ones. Julie stopped drinking to help her liver recover, and I followed her lead. I want to live as long as possible, waking up next to her every morning. Earlier, I mentioned Julie's beauty, intelligence, and capacity for retribution, and how smitten I was with her. Now, there's no question, I am in love. She has endured the loss of a spouse to cancer, raised 2 children on her own, and survived a betrayal by the man she trusted. Yet, she still knows how to love, and it's me she loves, flaws and all. What an extraordinary woman. Story 2. Jen Wilson has been happily married to Pete for 12 years. Pete was her rock, her everything. But after the birth of their daughter Stephanie 3 years ago, their intimate life became predictable and mundane. Despite this, Jen loved Pete wholeheartedly. Recently, the leadership at Jen's workplace changed. Her former boss was replaced by Brad Jennings, a handsome and charismatic young man. Talking to Brad, Jen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of attraction to him. She didn't see him as a substitute for Pete, but rather as a potential sexual partner. Jen kept glancing at Brad, fantasizing about what they could do together. But she never put these thoughts into practice, considering them nothing more than obscene daydreams. But lately, these fantasies began to occupy all her daytime hours. Her nerves were giving out, and she was constantly dreaming about Brad. Pete noticed her distant behavior and repeatedly noted that her thoughts seemed to be far away. It turned out that her thoughts were absorbed in vivid intimate fantasies involving Brad. These fantasies seemed to ignite a newfound assertiveness in her communication with Pete, and she began to demand activities from him that they had not practiced for years during intimate moments. But even when Pete brought her to the peak of pleasure, her thoughts remained focused on Brad. She would be content if she just indulged in her fantasies, ignoring reality. But her fantasies became reality when unexpected events unfolded. Brad, her colleague, asked her to stay late to work on an important contract offer for a key client. Throughout the evening's work, Brad demonstrated impeccable manners and behaved like a true gentleman. When they finished reviewing the final version of their proposal, Brad's face lit up with a smile followed by an approving nod. Yes, it's great. Thank you very much, Jen, he expressed his gratitude in recognition of a job well done. Brad offered to invite her to dinner. Jen thought for a moment, struggling with her desires and common sense. Succumbing to carnal impulses, she finally gave in. Okay, let me tell Pete not to worry, she decided and reached for the phone to make a call. She called home, and when Pete picked up the phone, she excitedly exclaimed, "Pete, my love, Brad is absolutely delighted with how well I worked today. As a token of appreciation, he wants to treat me to dinner at the company's expense. Isn't that fantastic? So, I might be a little late, do you mind?" Pete smiled, genuinely happy for her. In the last few times she had shared her concerns about Brad with Pete, not recognizing and praising her work since he became her boss. Pete replied, "This is amazing, darling. You finally got the recognition you deserve. Enjoy your dinner. I have an early meeting tomorrow, so you'll probably be asleep when you get home," he said before they confessed their love to each other. After finishing the conversation, Brad invited Jen to one of the elite restaurants in the city. Throughout the romantic candlelit dinner, he demonstrated charm, humor, and attentiveness towards Jen. Brad shared details of his life, including graduating from Stanford, a recent divorce, and cherished weekly meetings with his daughter. Although he admitted that he still had lingering feelings for his ex, he hoped to move on and build a new relationship. In turn, Jen talked about her family, her love for her husband and daughter. At times, she would reach out to touch Brad's hand, talking about proud moments of family trips or events. Brad kindly paid for dinner, and they stood at the entrance waiting for the valet to bring his car. Putting his arm around Jen's shoulders, he kissed her on the cheek and expressed gratitude for the wonderful date. Contrary to common sense, Jen reciprocated by gently hugging Brad around the waist and lightly kissing him on the lips. "I had a great time tonight, Brad. Hey, race a kiss to thank you for being an amazing boss." Their faces were close, just inches apart. Brad stared at her, his eyes full of desire. Gently touching her chin with his index finger, he forced her to meet his gaze. When their lips met, they hugged tightly, lost in the moment. When Brad's car pulled up, they reluctantly separated, but he hugged her tightly, putting her in the car without saying a word. He drove them to his apartment. At that moment, their passion overcame all rational thoughts. They quickly found themselves in Brad's spacious bed and spent several hours exploring each other's bodies. Brad showed her pleasures she had never experienced with Pete before. Exhausted, they finally lay down together when it was well past 1 o'clock in the morning. Jen glanced at her watch and realized that it was time for her to go home. She confessed regretfully, "Brad, I shouldn't have done this, but you've been my fantasy ever since you became my boss." Brad nodded in agreement and confessed, "I've wanted you to since the day I started working. I hesitated to approach you because I was afraid that you would feel my desire. Jen, can we do this again?" "Yes, Brad, when the opportunity presents itself, we can meet. But please understand that I don't have romantic feelings for you. I just want to get into a physical relationship. My family is my priority, and I don't want to jeopardize that connection. Despite this, I am ready to do with you what I would never do with my husband." They got up and went to the shower, wiping all traces of intimacy from their bodies. After getting dressed hastily, Brad drove her to her car at the office. In the car, they kissed passionately for several minutes before Jen pulled away. "That's enough for today. I need to get home before Pete suspects anything." When Jen arrived home, she found Pete sleeping peacefully. She looked at her husband lying in bed and thought, "I really love you. It's just a temporary affair. I'm sure I'm going to get tired of Brad soon. You will never know about it, and we will continue to live as devoted partners for the rest of our lives." From that night and for the next 6 weeks, Brad and Jen met at different motels at Brad's discretion. In the living room, Brad and Jen found themselves engrossed in their bestial desires. Brad admitted that he urgently needed an intimate release because after the divorce, he had not had intimacy for more than a year. Jen also craved a more adventurous and unconventional intimate life to bring animation back to her world. She even started hinting at Pete, encouraging him to explore uncharted territories. But Pete was suspicious of her suggestions, doubting the origin of her knowledge. "How did you know about this, dear?" Guilt suddenly overwhelmed Jen, causing her to fall to her knees and meet Pete's gaze. "Oh my God, I've been reading too many explicit novels lately. I'm sorry if I suggested something that you don't like." Pete shook his head, assuring her that wasn't the point. "It's not that. It's just that you've become so assertive lately. It feels like you already have experience with what you're asking me to do. You're acting more like an instructor than a sweetheart." Panic gripped Jen, and she desperately begged for forgiveness. "I'm really sorry, dear. I just thought we could explore new knowledge together. I promise to stop reading those books that make me think like that." Pete just smiled and hugged her. "You can read whatever you want. Could you give me some time so I can get used to experimenting with this new material?" The next day, Jen went to work and entered Brad's office. She closed the door behind her and told Brad to take a break from their liaisons, at least for a while. Yen's husband began to be suspicious of her new knowledge of various intimate techniques and actions, which made her feel guilty for taking on the role of her husband's sex teacher. "Jen, it would be better if you tell Pete about our intimate meetings," Brad suggested, "not as lovers but as friends with benefits, as they say. Now this will remove the guilt you feel and allow our relationship to be open and honest. Pete just needs to understand that for you and me, this is just physical satisfaction without any emotional attachment." Brad's suggestion would also clarify how Jen gained knowledge and experience in these new sexual encounters. As Brad continued to massage Jen, she couldn't help but moan. "Are you saying that your sex life at home hasn't gotten much better since we started making out with each other?" asked Brad. Jen had to admit that her intimate life with Pete now bordered on fantasy. She leaned closer and kissed Brad passionately. The desire was overwhelming, and she didn't want this moment to end. He was able to inflame her feelings like no one else. As the days passed, the thought of revealing her connection to Brad to Pete haunted her. It was becoming increasingly difficult to hide their meetings. Just the thought of Pete finding out the truth through a caress, mistake, or a careless word terrified her. During their intimate moments in Brad's apartment, Jen discussed this issue with him. "Twice the time has come," she concluded. "Pete deserves to know about us." But the thought of him being devastated by accidental exposure haunted her. "I think I can help him understand that our relationship is just a temporary phenomenon, and as soon as it ends, everything will return to normal. Only our intimate life will improve significantly." Brad nodded in agreement. "Yes, I think you should talk to him about it. I don't want to be the cause of a breakup or negative consequences. I genuinely care about Pete, and I know that he loves you deeply. Knowing about our meetings will deeply hurt him, perhaps lead to unwise actions. You need to find a way to break the news in a way that minimizes the pain and gives him the opportunity to see the big picture. I'll talk to him tonight. I'm sure he'll understand." Pete got home from work before Jen and had just finished taking a shower. Tonight, he planned to invite Jen and their daughter to dinner, something he treasured as precious family time. His world revolved around these two amazing women. But when he opened the glass door of the shower, he noticed a small drop of water inside, stuck between two panes. It caught his attention at eye level, and it was impossible not to notice. Pete thought about it. Water should not get inside in this way. We have two options, either disassemble and fix the door or just replace it. He made a mental note and continued to get dressed. Just as he was pulling on his trousers, Jen came into the room. "Hi, honey," she greeted him. "Hello to you too. You better start getting ready for dinner." "You're a little late," Pete replied. On the way home, Jen stopped by Brad's. As a result, traces of their meeting flowed down her thighs. This was the first time she had brought any traces of Brad's presence with her. But before she told Pete tonight, she needed to gather her strength and convince herself that this was the right thing to do. Brad let her down, and they discussed how Jen would break the news to Pete. Jen turned on the shower and closed the door, taking advantage of the moment to raise the issue of the door itself and a drop of water. Pete took the opportunity to mention this problem and offered to either repair or replace the door. As Jen slowly undressed, Pete caught his breath when he saw her panties and bra. Confused, he asked Jen about the fact that there was something like a seed on her thigh. Pete asked nervously, "Is that what I think it is?" "Please explain, Jen." Jen began to explain, "Yes, it is, but let me explain. It's not what you're suggesting. You see, Brad and I." Interrupting her, Pete exclaimed, "What do you mean it's not what it seems? It's another man's seed. Is this your boss seed? Are you cheating on me?" Stunned, Pete grabbed his head with both hands and sank down on the edge of the bed. Jen walked over to him and sat down next to him, hugging him tenderly. "Pete, yes, I have an intimate relationship with Brad," she confessed, trying to comfort him. "Actually, the intimate connection is just amazing, but he doesn't matter to me at all. I only love you. The intimate relationship with Brad is purely physical since we are just friends with privileges. It has no emotional connection and will not affect our relationship," Jen reassured Pete, feeling pleased with the way she emphasized the insignificance of the affair. Pete stood up abruptly, recoiling. "Don't you dare touch me. How could you betray me by having an affair and even to come after someone else's man without washing? Get out of my sight immediately. Just go away." Jen protested, "No, Pete, this is my house too. I want to be honest with you about my affair, which I believe will end in a few months. I wanted to tell you about it myself to avoid unnecessary pain. By touching on this topic, we will be able to put it in the right perspective and understand that it has no meaning for our relationship." Pete stared at her puzzled. "Doesn't matter what kind of connection are you talking about? I hate to see that you're attracted to someone else and don't admit it. When did you lose your sense of morality? When did you disregard marriage vows?" Pete took his overnight bag out of the closet and began to pack his belongings, including shaving supplies, underwear, and a fresh work shirt. "Well, my dear, if you refuse to leave, then I will do it. I can't live with someone else's woman, and that's exactly what you've become. You're not the woman I married, and I won't know who you are anymore. I'll let you know where it'll be in a day or so, but in the meantime, please stay out of my way." Jen tried to stop Pete, begging him to figure out the situation. "Dear, we can find a solution. Let's talk about it." Pete pushed her hard, causing her to hit the wall and suffer a painful shoulder injury. The physical pain he caused her made her realize that this was no longer the Pete she once loved. Driven by a surge of emotion, she hit him in the face with an open palm. In response, Pete was stunned and stared at her in disbelief. "Did you hit me?" he exclaimed incredulously. "After you confessed that you cheated on me? Who are you really?" "It's me, your wife," she replied, her voice full of remorse. "I was just shocked by your reaction. In all the time we've been married, you've never raised a hand against me. I just reacted at that moment. I'm sorry. It was a mistake." Pete kept his tone calm as he asked her a question, "Are you apologizing for slapping me or for cheating on me?" Her response was quick and decisive, "My affair with Brad is not cheating. There is no love here, only passion, and you benefit from it. Hasn't our sex life improved since I started dating Brad? Is there something missing for you as my husband? Haven't I fulfilled my role as the wife you married? What have you really lost from my meetings with Brad?" Pete's expression hardened as he answered, his voice filled with pain, "What have I lost? I've lost the ability to trust you. I have lost my confidant, lover, and best friend. I've lost more than you can imagine. Don't you understand the magnitude of my loss?" She shook her head, a look of incomprehension on her face. "No, I don't understand." Jen suddenly found hope. "Look, I have a better way to explain this. Do you remember that water bubble on the shower door that you were talking about? So what I have done, and will continue to do until everything is resolved, is no more than that drop of water on the door. Let me clarify, does this affect the functionality of the door or its overall integrity? Absolutely not. When the water bubble evaporates, there will be no trace of it, the glass will remain flawless, and the bathroom floor will be dry. That's exactly the impact of my collaboration with Brad. It's just a minor problem, like a water bubble on the door. As soon as it disappears, everything will return to normal. Pete thought for a moment. Jen, I love you, and I will always love you. But I can't just forget that your affair is ruining our relationship. At the moment, I'm going to leave. You have to decide for yourself what's best for you. Just remember what I said about the shower door. Because of the water bubbles, you will either have to repair the door or change it. The same principle applies to our marriage. So, make your choice. With that, Pete left the house. Jen didn't know that this would be their last moment together in the house. Jen turned to Brad and told him about recent events. Brad offered Jen to find solace at his house, but she refused, saying that she needed to be alone. Jen believed that Pete had overreacted and would eventually come to his senses. Their marriage was strong, and she believed that he would withstand this minor offense on her part. When Jen drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of passionate encounters with Brad. He was very sympathetic to Jens' domestic crisis, but deep down, Brad wanted to keep in touch with Jen because she satisfied his intimate desires. He recognized her skill in this regard. Brad dismissed Pete's concern as insignificant. Now that Jen was in his power, Brad felt entitled to use her for his satisfaction until he got tired of her. Brad was used to luxury cruises, and recently he came across a brochure about an unusual 2-week trip to the Eastern Caribbean. Given the cold winter weather, the prospect of spending 2 weeks in the Caribbean seemed incredibly attractive. Jen still didn't spend the whole night with Brad. She would visit him for a few hours and then return home, hoping that Pete would get in touch to discuss their problems. But Pete made it clear that he would not return as long as Jen continued her affair with Brad. Brad tried to stay the night at Jens' house, which forced her to send her daughter to stay with a friend. As they settled into Pete's bed, the phone rang, and Pete was on the other end of the line. Furious to discover Brad's presence, Jen was also furious when she realized that she was going to have a sexual relationship with Brad, violating Pete's exclusive rights. She asked Brad to leave, promising to meet him at the office the next day at work. Brad enthusiastically announced that he had booked a 2-week Caribbean cruise for the two of them, assuming that they would be free to enjoy each other's company without worrying about Pete's opinion. He believed that if Jen joined him on the cruise, Pete would be overcome with jealousy and come to his senses, desperately trying to win her back. On his return, Jen came to realize that her relationship with Brad was costing her too much, both financially and emotionally. Her desires were hurting the person she loved most in the world. She believed that spending time with Brad would help her get rid of these feelings. Jen agreed with herself and decided to inform Pete of her plans by leaving a message at his hotel. She affectionately addressed him as Sweet Pete and explained that she was going to go on a 2-week cruise with Brad. Jen hoped that spending time together would help her get rid of passionate thoughts about Brad. She assured Pete that when she returned, she would be completely devoted to him forever. Jen also mentioned that since she would be gone for 2 weeks, Pete could stay at their house and take care of their daughter. She casually mentioned the ongoing problem with water leakage in the shower door, noting that it had increased slightly but still did not cause significant harm. Jen asked Pete to sort it out while he was there, reminding him of the water bubble in the door, which she had already mentioned. Finally, Jen went on a 2-week cruise with Brad. But 10 days later, she realized that her fantasies about Brad had turned into a harsh reality. Apart from the physical aspect of their relationship, they had very little in common. Throughout the cruise, he treated her like an object, ignoring her feelings and desires. Every morning, he expected immediate lemming, ignoring her need to tidy herself up. His morning breath was disgusting, which completely turned her away from him. It was impossible to sleep because of his incessant snoring. She couldn't help but see these flaws in her once perfect lover. On the 7th night at sea, after a heated argument about ending their affair, Brad drunkenly punched her in the face. Although he later apologized, it was too late and not enough. 2 weeks later, Yen's fascination with this fantasy faded. Pete, Brad, and the shower door had lost their appeal. On the 14th day, they reached the port and flew home. Jen said goodbye to Brad, hugging him. When he dropped her off at the front door that late evening, she plucked up the courage and said, "Brad, it's over. I'm tired of you." On this trip, fantasies and desires disappeared. All I need now is Pete. Thank you for the pleasant moments, but it's time to move on. Brad stared at her and arrogantly replied, "It's over when I say it's over." Jen stood her ground, determined to figure out the situation. "I'm going to open this door right now and call Pete," she said. "I need to apologize for my behavior and fix everything. And if you're still here when I'm done, I hope hell help you come to your senses. He's much better than you, he's a real man." Brad replied with contempt in his words, "You're just a stupid woman who likes cheap thrills. Eventually, Pete will realize that. When he's gone, you'll come crawling back. If you can convince me, I might consider being with you." Heading for the car, Brad added, "Save yourself the trouble of coming to the office tomorrow. Your things will be packed and sent to you along with compensation upon termination." Jen quickly unlocked the door and hurried into the house. Just as she was about to grab the phone, a letter lying on the kitchen table caught her attention. Carefully taking the letter out of the envelope, she began to read and found that it was addressed to her and written in Pete's sloppy handwriting. "I want to touch on the issue of the water bubble in the shower door that you mentioned. First, I should point out that your belief that the bubble would not cause visible harm was mistaken. But you were right to make the connection between the water bubble and the acts of infidelity with Brad. If you had been present, you would have seen that each appearance of a water bubble left a small mark on the glass. Over time, this sediment accumulated and began to cloud the glass, reducing its transparency. Unfortunately, you weren't here to watch this. If you were here, you would have noticed that moisture eventually led to the formation of mold and mildew between the glasses. Now, a significant black spot has formed on the glass, which not only spoils the appearance but also poses a danger to health, as well as the state of our marriage. Your actions have clouded our relationship and led to unhealthy circumstances. As with the shower door, we have two options. Option 1 is to repair the door by disassembling and restoring it, or option 2 is to completely replace the door. When we were evaluating the options for our marriage, one of them seemed viable until you decided to go on a 2-week cruise with your lover. From that moment on, I could not imagine any way to restore our relationship, so I chose the second option. I will replace the shower door, replace you, and eventually replace our marriage. If you hadn't gone on that ill-fated cruise, you would have seen both our daughter and me looking forward to saving our marriage. But your infidelity during the cruise, which led to the appearance of mold and mildew, left us no choice but to start all over again. Your actions not only pose a threat to our well-being but also poison the love I once felt for you. You completely extinguished my feelings. Stephanie and I made the decision to leave on the 3rd day of your cruise, and now we live in a place that will be difficult for you to find. As soon as your cruise comes to an end, my lawyer will hand you the divorce papers, stating adultery as the basis. The testimony of the steward on the ship, as well as the people living in Brad's apartment building who can confirm your indiscretion, has been collected. In addition, the receptionists at various hotels where you often visited were interviewed. I have evidence and testimonies confirming your infidelity, including an audio recording of our phone conversation in which you unsuccessfully tried to justify your actions by simply making love. I reported Brad to his boss for abusing his official position to enter into an intimate relationship with you. And upon returning to the office, he faces dismissal. His company is offering me a settlement agreement to resolve the situation. I firmly believe that Brad will try to manipulate you into continuing the affair, and if you refuse, he may eventually fire you. But if he gets fired, he will no longer be able to control you either at work or in his personal life. It is possible that your colleagues will find out about the situation, so it is important for you to be persistent, because work will be your only source of income. You were right to compare your actions and their consequences to a water bubble. If I were you, I'd be thinking about our marriage, looking at the shower door, hoping to find the person I originally married. If you can afford it, you can take the house, since I have already transferred my ownership rights to you. Now, without any guilt, you can invite your friends with privileges to what used to be our home. I took away half of the furniture so Stephanie and I could set up a new home. Once we're settled in, you can talk to Stephanie, but I have to insist that she never comes into the house when there are other men around. Your behavior is not a good example for her. Jen dropped the letter and knelt on the floor. She realized that her irresistible attraction to Brad had clouded her mind. Because of her rash actions, she lost a once wonderful marriage and her best friend. Now all she has left is an empty house with a shower door covered in black spots of mold and mildew. She knew she would never fix the shower door as it served as a constant reminder of her mistakes. It's been a month since their divorce. Jen was never able to continue working in the office. All her colleagues looked at her askance and whispered behind her back. When Brad was fired, their intimate relationship became known to everyone. Now Jen is completely immersed in herself. Her mental state is absolutely unstable. Constant use of antidepressants has not yet given her any improvement. Jen sold her house and lives with her parents, blaming herself for destroying her family.